Thank you so much for joining us tonight. We are going to get started in just a minute or two, waiting for everybody to join us from the waiting room. All right, we are going to go ahead and get started. We have a lot to cover tonight, and I want to be really mindful of everybody's time. Thank you so much for joining us tonight for this BBYO Parent Webinar. My name is Erica Abrams, and I'm the Manager of Parent and Advisor Experiences at BBYO, and we're really glad you're here. I'm so excited to be joined by two fantastic presenters tonight from Accept You. First, we have Stephen Friedfeld, co-founder and COO of Accept You. Stephen has served as an admissions dean at both Cornell and Princeton as he brings a wealth of insider knowledge about what schools are really looking for. Alongside Stephen is Rena Levy, who has been with Accept You for over 12 years. Before that, she was the director of admissions for the joint program between Columbia, Barnard, and JTS, and also worked in academic advising at Hebrew University. She's a phenomenal counselor and speaker, and we're really lucky to have them both with us tonight. As you know, tonight's session is all about what it really takes to stand out in the college admissions process. We're going to be covering a lot of the questions that you submitted in advance, and we'd love for you to keep the conversation going by adding your questions into the chat. We are going to do our best to get to as many as we can. So with that, I'm going to pass it over to Stephen, and we'll get this show on the road.
Thanks, Erica. Can you hear me okay? Great. Hi, everyone. Thank you so much for joining me and my colleague, Rena. As you know, we're talking about standing out in college admissions. I'll give a very brief overview. As I said, or as Erica introduced me, I've worked in college admissions, undergraduate admissions at Cornell University for 4 years. And then I worked in graduate admissions at Princeton for 6 years. And I co-founded Accept You in 2010. So we've been around for 15 years. And we have about 30 counselors at Accept You, all of whom are former admissions officers. And I'd like to introduce Rena as one of our counselors. Rena, if you want to introduce yourself.
Great. Good evening. Thank you for joining us. I have experience at admissions running the joint program between Columbia University, Barnard College, and the Jewish Theological Seminary. And as was mentioned, I also worked in academic advising at Hebrew University. And I'm actually now on 13 years, at Accept You. And I've had the privilege of working with some really fantastic students and families, international, from Asia, from Central America, from Europe, and then also domestic students as well in the US.
Great, thanks. I'll just explain a little bit about Accept You in case people are not familiar. So Our admissions consulting firm, as I said, we've been around for 15 years, and we work entirely virtually. We've been virtual since day one. And of course, the rest of the world went virtual in 2020, but we always operated that way, meaning we wanted to connect students and counselors regardless of location. And so we have a very high acceptance rate for our students into one of their top three choices. I think a lot of the reason for our success is because we encourage our students to apply to the schools and the universities that are the best fit or best match for them. When we work with younger students, we're encouraging them to do a lot of research into who they are and what they want to study and the kinds of universities that could be a good fit or good match for them. And then just a little bit of an overview. We consider ourselves a boutique high touch counseling firm. All of our students work one-on-one with a counselor. As I mentioned, we have about 30 counselors that accept you, all of whom are former admissions officers, and our counselors are in constant communication behind the scenes. So if you work with our company, you're working just with one counselor like Rena, but behind the scenes, the counselors have constant communications and conversations, keeping abreast of what's going on in admissions these days. And it does change year over year over year. It's actually incredible how many changes there are every single year. And we do our best to stay informed and then to pass on our insight and our knowledge and our experience of having worked inside a university admissions office. We pass that information and that insight on to our students. We help students as young as ninth and 10th graders. We call that the planning phase or the foundational phase. And with younger students, and we'll talk about this later on in this presentation, we're helping them think about what courses to take or what kinds of standardized exams might be right for them, or what is an extracurricular activity and why should you get involved and how do you get involved. With our older students, 11th and 12th graders, we're becoming much more serious in the applying phase, thinking about things like their list of universities, strategies for admissions, which majors could be a good fit or good match for them, where will they thrive academically and be successful socially as well. This is a very quick overview. Over the years, we've worked with, I think we're over 8,100 students at this point. And our students are not just looking at the top 25. That's a misconception that we're always trying to talk to parents about. If your student is looking at a top 25 or top 50 type university, sure, we do have a lot of students who are interested in those, but we've had students admitted to more than 350 universities over the years. This is from, I think, last year's results. You can take a quick snapshot and see we have students who are applying to large public research institutions, smaller liberal arts and sciences colleges, institutes of technology, Ivy and Ivy Plus, and other private universities not listed here. We just for space considerations, we had a lot of students applying to and accepted into art and design colleges, as well as international universities as well. So I'll just dive into it with Rena. We were going to have almost a fireside chat where Rena and I have a discussion about all of these topics that you see here on our agenda. We did receive, I don't know, 60 or 70 questions in advance, and I know some people will be typing in questions as well. So we want to be mindful of our time and efficient with our time to give you the information, but also to get to those burning questions. So let's start with how admissions officers read applications. I'll start, and then Rena, you and I can have a conversation. It changes from university to university. Some universities will have applications read by a single person for a particular geography. Other universities will have a committee of two reading applications. Sometimes if the volume of applications is so high, they might have screening that occurs, which is a quick read, meaning the university admissions officers are going to be thinking about your transcript is first and foremost important. What kinds of courses did you take? What grades did you receive? How well did you do? Is there an alignment of what you indicate on your application you want to study with the kinds of courses you've taken and the kinds of success you've had in those classes? The essays are really critical. So that is not a myth. If a university asks any essay questions, some of the more selective universities could have literally 6 or 7 additional supplemental essay questions. you can get a sense of how important the essays are to an institution based on how many they ask, which types of questions they ask, what they're looking for, the length of each essay. So we spend a lot of our time with students on their essay brainstorming, development, as well as iteratively helping them edit those essays. We're trying to help students put their best foot forward, and the universities are trying to get a sense of who each applicant is. And you can get a lot of who a student is based on her essays and what she writes about herself, based on her extracurricular activities list, meaning what did she do for 3 or 4 years of high school? How did she spend her time? How a student spends her time gives universities an indication of who that student is and even what kinds of contributions she might make to the university community. And we're also looking, but much less so, at letters of recommendation, meaning what do others have to say about you? So, Rena, maybe I'll pass it on to you. I mean, we always used to say at Cornell, we read every application. That is true. We literally read every application, but we'd say some applications we read more quickly than others. And so I'm curious to know your take on that. A quicker read versus having more eyes, more people review each application.
Right. So I think sometimes it really does depend on the university when you're talking about a large public university like a
Yeah,
UCLA that's getting over 100,000 applications, what that pre-screening might look like versus a small liberal arts college like Middlebury.
yeah,
But I would say that the expectation is that there is a real person reading your application, right? I think sometimes discouraging is how much time they actually spend on it. And so
yeah.
because of the volume in which admissions officers are going through all of the applicants, they're usually spending a few minutes on each applicant, and that's generous, right?
Yeah,
And so
yeah.
that's why it's so important to really make sure that your essays stand out, right? That you're telling a cohesive and coherent narrative about who you are as an applicant.
And you can tell about who you are based on not through just your essays, but your extracurriculars. What you do, what you choose to spend your time on for 4 years tells your story. As I like to say to students, if you hand someone, a stranger, a piece of paper with 5 hobbies of yours or 5, extracurricular activities, and ask that stranger about you, they'll get a sense of who you are and how you spent your time over the 4 years. So we always tell students try to become memorable, interesting, likable, unique, or different. I think memorable is the key word if you're applying to a selective or very selective university, because they do have a very high volume of applicants these days. So, and that's what this third section, this gray color, is referring to. Admissions officers don't normally accept students on the first time they read an application. They usually go through an iterative process. They might reject applications if the scores and the grades and such really are not matching what the university is looking for, but they don't normally accept students right away or applicants right away. They normally will take notes and then pass on their notes and pass on their summary to others, their colleagues, their supervisors, a committee, and so forth. I mean, it is of course certain that some students are so, or applicants are so stellar perhaps, that they will get admitted without too many eyes reading the application. But most university admissions processes have students' applications read several times by several people. I like to say that it's really good to have more people reading your application, because what if one person reads your application and for whatever reason they don't like your essays or the extracurriculars you've joined? And Rena, we were talking about that in preparation for this webinar. I think you never know if someone is a 23-year-old alumnus of that institution who's reading applications in the admissions office, or maybe someone who's 65 and retired from. I actually have worked with those folks who are 65 and retired from a university and then become a seasonal reader. So I've said this for years, you want to make your application and your essays and such universally likable, so that no matter who is reading it, that person, any of those people will be wanting to meet you. They want to bring you onto their institution, onto their campus for 4 years.
Right.
Anything else that I missed? Yeah.
I think the likability is becoming a larger trend, almost kind of the would you want this applicant to be your child's roommate or your sister's roommate, right? Depending on how old the admissions reader is. But
Sure.
that's kind of the, do you want this person on campus?
Yeah.
And that's really a big part of the likability factor. And it doesn't mean that there are certain things you need to do to be likable, but it's how you present yourself in the application, which we'll start to get
Yeah.
into all of these different components.
And it's not quantifiable. There's not, likability 0 to 10, but it's, you can become likable based on the things you say, the things you've done. Well, let's move on. As you said, the GPA and the rigor of the curriculum. This is by far the most important criterion is, your transcript. What did you take and how well did you do in those courses? You alluded to this with UCLA. Actually, I'll correct you. They have more than 150,000 applications. But yeah, the larger universities, especially the large public research flagship institutions, they tend to recalculate GPA. But when I worked in private university admissions, we actually didn't even use the numerical GPA. It's really funny because every day of my life, when I'm talking to student or prospective clients of our company, they'll say, "Oh, my GPA is a 4.16532 something." And I say, "Well, I don't even know what that means. There's no context. Is that 4.16 out of 5 or out of 10?" So the private universities tend not to even use the numerical GPA because it changes from high school to high school. Some high schools are out of a 4.0, some are out of 4.5, some out of 5.0. I've seen 6, I've seen 7, I've seen 10, 20, and 100. So I've seen and a few others, but basically that's why it's hard to know what a numerical GPA even means. Instead, I always looked at the grades. What courses did you, and very closely, what courses did you take and how well did you do in those courses? Maybe you can talk about, um,
Right.
you know, increasing your rigor as you advance from 9 to 10 to 11 to 12.
Right. So I think that, again, I sometimes have a parent who'll be like, my child has a 3.9. Is that good? And again, the context is really important. And so
Yeah.
when I was reading, I think one of the things that the admissions officers are looking at is also the school profile to see the context in terms of when we talk about rigor. I think a lot of families assume it means you have to take all the APs, and then they're nervous if their child's school doesn't offer APs, and that's not the case. So it is contextualized, right?
Yeah.
So if a student is from an IB curriculum, right, that's a 7-point scale. If the school offers lots of APs and the student isn't taking any, that context is important. If the school offers only 3 APs and the student is taking 3, that's
It's
amazing, right? It
impressive.
means that they're taking the most rigorous curriculum at their high school. So we really like to see when rigorous courses are offered, and again, it will depend on the high school, that a student is challenging themselves. And then there is the inevitable question, and I even saw this, what is better, to get an A in a regular class or a B in an AP class? And the answer is to get the A in the AP class, obviously.
If you
But
can, yeah.
if you can, right? So there is also the important balance. We want students to challenge themselves and succeed in that challenge. You don't want to overburden yourself as a student by thinking you need to take all of the AP courses if you're not going to be able to succeed in that curriculum.
Yeah, that's a fantastic explanation. I always say, we want you to take a curriculum that is challenging, but not so challenging that your grades go from, let's say, all A's to all B's, or a mix of A's and B's to then a mix of B's and C's, or whatever the case is. So maybe that is a tipping point. Maybe taking 3 APs and you can get all A's. Maybe taking that fourth AP really was too many and that brings you to all B's or something like that. So and that's why, the high schools do tend to restrict the number of honors or AP classes for ninth and 10th graders to allow that transition into high school, to make sure that they understand the rigor and the pace of the courses and the challenge of the courses. And they do improve, or rather allow students to increase their rigor as they advance. I just feel badly for students who attend a high school where, I always call it the wild, wild west, where the high school does not put a cap or a restriction on the number of AP classes that a student can take. And then the top students are all vying against one another and thinking, well, my friend over there is looking at top universities and he took 16 APs, so I'll take 17 or something like that. I mean, the reality is I really do like when the high schools put a cap on the number of AP classes. I like when they capped them such that the students cannot take classes after or take AP classes only in grades 11 and 12. But every high school is different.
Right.
Context matters. It really does. Yeah.
I wanted to add one point about the APs is that not every university is going to, they will look great on your college transcript or your college application, but not every college is going to accept AP credits. So when I
Oh
was
yeah.
at Columbia, they notoriously said, you will get a Columbia degree for doing courses at Columbia. Your AP Psych class isn't going to count towards
Yeah.
your Columbia degree, but that depends on each institution. So there are often public state universities that you can come in at sophomore standing, but that's going to
Yeah.
depend on each school. Dual enrollment and if there is usually a junior college nearby, I know that that's also a trend. That's definitely seen as rigorous. I know
Very.
that for many students, especially sometimes if they've maxed out of what is available at their high school in terms of academic curriculum, dual enrollment can be a great opportunity. The other thing I want to just go back to is depending on a student's interests, as students are picking and choosing what's the best curriculum for them, right? So a student who knows they're really excited about engineering, then they should probably be taking that AP Calc class and the AP Physics C class.
Yeah.
And if they're struggling with history, maybe they don't take AP US history. But it
Yeah.
depends on every individual based on their academic interests.
That's a good point. I really want students to take their higher level courses in areas that align with what they think they want to study at the university. Oops, I think I went back one. So, and then the last question, weighted versus unweighted, and we don't want to spend too much time on this, but unweighted means all courses are out of 4.0 and an AP physics class counts the same as a gym class. Everything is 0 to 4.0. And weighted means they put more weight or quality points, some call it, to those courses that are either honors or AP or IB. And so, like I said, a lot of universities do not necessarily even use the numerical GPA because it changes from high school to high school. But those institutions that recalculate their own GPA internally, they do that to try and put all applicants on the same playing field so that they can review applicant 1 versus 2 versus 100 versus 200. But they'll take out the gym class and the health class and some electives that are non-academic. So extracurricular activities, I'll just give a quick overview. As a company, we advise students to get involved in about 4 to 7 extracurricular activities, 2, 3, or 4 years for each activity if possible. And so if you have a ninth or 10th grader at home, yeah, we want them to get involved in extracurricular activities. And if they like them, stick with them. The universities are only just asking you to report on those extracurriculars that you stuck with for 2, 3, or 4 years. If you join volleyball in ninth grade and you don't like it and you drop it, then don't continue with volleyball. But if it's a ninth grade only activity, you don't need to tell colleges about volleyball. You don't need to tell them about everything you've tried and then dropped. You just want to tell them about the things that you've tried and then stuck with. It's the things that you stick with that really tell your story. So if you do get involved in grades 9 or 10 in some activities and you like them or love them and you stick with them, those will become 3 or 4 year activities. The summer activities, if you do something in the summer after grade 10 or grade 11, even grade 9, although I think that's early, but if you do something in the summer, that's typically a 1 year activity. And that's okay. The universities understand that that's probably not going to be repeated the following summer. So the reason we like to see 4 to 7 extracurriculars is because we get a good sense of who someone is based on how they spent their time over 4 years. And the universities are extrapolating and thinking if you've done these things for 2, 3, or 4 years of high school, you'll probably continue to do these or similar activities in college. I've seen extracurriculars that include more than 20 activities. That is not good. no one can do 20 things very well. It's actually a turnoff to admissions officers. It looks like you were just joining activities for the sake of joining activities. I've seen extracurricular activities list with 0 or 1 thing, and that's probably not great because then the universities don't get a sense of who you are. So this is just a guideline. I can get a good sense of who someone is and where he spends his time if I looked at 4 to 7 extracurriculars. Maybe Rena, you could talk about some of these other things that we've listed here.
Yeah, again, I just want to really reiterate that it's definitely quality over quantity. And again, sometimes there are short-term things like summer programs, community service, volunteering. I think that a lot of families and students think that they have to do everything. I have to have a varsity sport and I have to have this. And really, I think of activities, and when I'm working with the students, is I tell them, this is your opportunity to share with the admissions committee what you care about, what's interesting to you. Everything from things that relate to potentially your academic interest to really random hobbies like knitting or cooking or ballroom dancing, whatever that might look like. Community service, I think for some students is really important, and that's a really important part of their narrative and their application. It doesn't mean that every student needs that. I think sometimes there are high schools that require hours to graduate. Those students have a lot more community service than a student at a boarding school who just isn't going to have those opportunities for community engagement in the same way when they're living away from home.
Right.
So I think that community service is great. I think that BBYO probably offers lots of opportunities for your children to participate in community service, in which case that's definitely something that if it's important for your kid and that's something that they've done over the course of high school, they would definitely want to highlight that on their application. And it's not just a matter of, I did this and I did that. It's why did you do that? And what was your impact, right? So how did you make an impact on your community? So it's not just, the one-time beach cleanup. It's maybe the student is interested in environmental issues, and there's a theme there in terms of the community service they're participating in and their prospective major potentially. So when we think about how can we kind of show that, right? So through awards, publications, what measurable results do you have for the activities that you're participating in? It doesn't mean you submit a certificate of participation with your application, but that kind of quantifiable showing the impact you've made.
I love the idea or the example of a beach cleanup. I think that is great if a student did that, but that's very different from maybe organizing, monthly beach cleanup of 12 other students at your school. Something. I mean, think about the difference between the two, and that's we said at the beginning, how do you become memorable? And that is really someone who cleans a beach one time isn't memorable, but someone who organized the beach cleanup monthly in their city could be great. Just to continue along with extracurricular activities, academic alignment. This is not required, but if you're applying to very highly selective universities, we these days tend to encourage students to have some extracurricular activities that align with what they indicate on their application they might want to study. There's a lot of ifs there. And so, if you indicate, for example, that you want to be a business major, then not only do I want you to take the IB or AP economics and business type courses, but I perhaps want you to have an internship of a sort, or maybe go to a business camp for 3 weeks at a university, or go to your local, your school might have a DECA or FBLA club. So that's what I mean by alignment of your academic interests and what you indicate, or rather what you experience for your 3 or 4 years of high school. You mentioned knitting and cooking and ballroom dancing, informal. I love those informal
I
activities,
do too.
hobbies. I mean, those are, I tell students, teach yourself a foreign language using Duolingo one summer. Well, okay. Well, is that an extracurricular activity? Of course, you just need to tell universities about it. So anything that you do on your own is actually going to be unique because you're doing that for yourself. You're not joining a club with 100 other students. So, and we're not averse to students joining clubs where their friends are also members, which is a good segue to talk about BBYO involvement. You had alluded to that. We're just saying a mix of all of this could really help you tell your story and what you're really interested in. Rena.
Right. So I know one of the themes I know that we will get to is kind of highlighting maybe Jewishness and Jewish activities. And so I think everyone here is here because their children are involved in BBYO to some degree. Probably for some students, this is their main extracurricular, and this is where their leadership activities shine, or their leadership opportunities, and they can show and demonstrate to the admissions committee, these are all of the things I've accomplished. This is why it's important to me. Absolutely, you should be highlighting this on your application. If
Without a
BBYO
doubt.
is where your leadership is, that's great. If BBYO is just something you do for fun and you enjoy going to the activities, but you don't have any leadership roles, it can still probably go on your activity list. It maybe just isn't in that top 1, 2, 3, the way that maybe tennis or debate or something else that you're involved in stands out.
Yeah. And then I mentioned already, joining too many activities really is a red flag for admissions offices. Oh, I don't want you to feel, the students or parents to feel that they need to be leaders in everything. But I do encourage students to maybe run for a leadership role in 11th or 12th grade, president, vice president, treasurer, secretary, captain or editor. But it could also be, you could be a mentor to a younger student. You could be a tutor to students, and that those are leadership roles as well. So think a little bit outside the box. You might have, or your child might have leadership roles and not even realize it. It's not required, it's not essential, but it is appealing to institutions, to academic institutions, because someone who's a leader maybe will become a leader in their chosen field someday, or a leader, on the university campus. So it shows that the student is committed and dedicated. So I think that those leadership roles, while not required, can be very appealing to the admissions committees. Um, I always want students to basically continue those activities that they like or love, and they should be willing to drop those activities that they're just not interested in. The activities that you stick with, like I said earlier, tell your story. Oh, I forgot to
Right.
mention, there's a QR code. So we actually, I don't know how many pages long. It's probably a 5 or 10 page extracurricular activities guide. So hopefully folks are taking out their camera and scanning the QR code here. It's a free extracurricular activities guide. I mean, everything that you and I have said in 4 minutes is in these 10 pages.
Right.
Yeah.
I just want to add, because I saw out of the corner of my eye, someone asked a question, and I'm not keeping up with the questions, but it is an important note. Part-time work.
Oh, I
Students
love that.
work, and that is so important. Sometimes students have to work, and it's important to contribute to their family. Sometimes they are working part-time because they just, their summer job at Jamba Juice. All of that is fantastic. I think that even if it is that part-time job at Jamba Juice during the summer, I think that having that commitment, that responsibility, that work ethic, all of those positive characteristics are usually extrapolated from part-time work. Another component of the common application that is being addressed right now are kind of additional responsibilities. Are you supporting, and this may be the case for some families, are you helping support your family financially? Are you caring for a sick or elderly relative? And so there is an appropriate part of the application where you can also identify that. And sometimes for those students, they maybe have fewer of the more
Sure.
traditional activities. And there is certainly the context to explain that in the application.
Yeah, I love that addition. That's on all colleges now. It was only a few colleges, maybe a year or two ago, but all universities now ask that question. Do you have household responsibilities? And if so, they understand you'll have fewer extracurriculars. Well, let's move on to the essays, because we got a lot of questions about these. Essays are important, as I mentioned at the beginning of this conversation. All universities, that's not entirely true. Most universities use one main essay, the common application essay. There are 7 essay prompts, and students need to answer only one of them, and it's a 650 word maximum. We advise students to get between about 550 and 650. And it's a really important main essay. You'll hear it called the Common App essay or the main essay. You might be applying, or to universities that are not on the common application, but most universities are. It's over 900 or perhaps 1,000 universities. The University of California has its own application system. MIT has its own
MIT.
application. There's a few that are standalone. But the reality is, you want to, I always say, tell your story. And I think that the question that you answered helps you tell your story. I like to see, as it shows here on maybe the fifth or so bullet, I like to see change or growth in the student from the beginning to the end. You want others to know, who you are, how you think, what kinds of things are important and things matter to you. It's really important to answer that essay prompt. You'd be surprised, a lot of students don't. A lot of these essay questions have shorter sub questions. It's not just one question, but then a few follow-ups. And we want students to answer those as well. Rena, I'm sure you have a few things to add to this.
Yeah. So it's actually one of my favorite things to do with students is actually before they start writing, the brainstorming process and kind of coming up with what is going to be the topic. And I think that ideally we come to the point where they realize, actually, yeah, I want to write about this. As much as one has excitement about doing their college applications and writing their essay, it's that kind of light bulb moment where they realize, no, this is something that really does represent me. I could write this. I feel like this is the story I want to tell. And so I think that that's a really important piece of it, is to have it feel authentic to the student, which leads into that last bullet point of AI, which is a new, it's a new thing that's added
new
to the presentation here. But I can tell if a student's used AI. Admissions committees can tell if a student has used AI. And even Duke University now is no longer incorporating the essay as their internal calculations. They're using it more to learn about the student in terms of when they kind of recalculate points for students. Because what's important is the narrative, right? They want something that feels authentic, right? That's really what we want to get out of the student experience when we're reading the essay. So that's kind of that first Common App essay. And then, as Stephen mentioned, depending on the selectivity of the school, right? So Stanford has a lot of extra supplements that students need to write. And there are themes to the supplemental essays. So many of them are kind of school specific. Why do you want to come to our school? Why do you want to come to UMass Amherst? And what do you want to study at University of Michigan? And then the other theme that's becoming more common is the community and background. Tell us about a community you come from. Tell us about how that's influenced you or motivated you. And I think this is probably a good segue for a lot of the questions that we saw that were submitted prior to this, which is it okay to write about being Jewish? And what will the response to that be? And I think that admittedly, this is maybe not a question that was asked as much 2 years ago, but it is certainly was a very prominent theme in the questions we saw.
Yeah.
And so I think I understand why it is the way that it is. And one of the things I will say is, if being Jewish is really important to your child and their activities are reflective of that, or this is what they want to write about in their essay for their community or for their main essay, I would say that you shouldn't shy away from who you are. And if you think that the university isn't going to accept you because of that, it's probably not the right fit for you, right? So if you feel like you can't share your Jewishness in your application, then that may not be the school for you. That said, I know I spoke with Stephen about this earlier, how much you want to share is up to you. Some students, again, their Jewishness might be a really important part of their identity, and other students, it may not be. So I think that discernment and choosing which schools you want also, when you're creating a school list, those are important considerations.
I'll put you on the spot. I'll tell you, of the 7 Common App essay questions, my favorite one, I don't see a lot of students answering it, but I would if I were 17. It's I don't know the exact wording, but where do you get lost in
Number
thought?
5. Yeah, like where do you lose all track of time?
Where do you lose all track of time? Thank you. Yeah. Is that your favorite? Or
it's one of my favorites because I think it gives students the opportunity.
What's your hobbies? Yeah.
Right. And I think for some of my students, one of the questions is kind of like, I just feel like I'm kind of normal, right? And I think that was also
that was
like,
one of the
I don't know
questions from
what's
the parents,
special about me, right? It's like, how do I make my child stand out? And one of the things I've said is, well, for you, you feel kind of like maybe normal and average going about your daily life. But how does your daily life and your regular experiences maybe differ from the applicant that's writing from Sao Paulo, Brazil, or the student in rural Kentucky, right? Who also is probably sitting there feeling like my life is really normal, but
Yeah.
compared to all these other applicants. So it's a matter of really thinking about what is it that makes me who I am and why am I doing the things I'm doing. So again, your life may feel really normal to you, but what are those things that you're doing that feel normal? Because that's actually probably where the interesting story is.
Thanks. Letters of recommendation, then I think we're almost done with the presentation, then we'll take Q&A. We always say, or I always say, if the university requires 3 letters of recommendation, submit 3 or at most 4, meaning X or X plus 1. That's my little algebra for tonight. And sometimes the universities will say, do not submit more than we require, and thus they will. I mean, you just need to follow the rules of the university. I think
Follow the
NYU used to always
directions.
say that. Yeah.
Yes,
Yeah,
follow the
follow
directions
directions.
always.
But I mean, we get students who say, well, I want them to know everything about me. So, from an admissions perspective, we used to say, the more letters of recommendation you're submitting, the more we start to question, is something going on? Are you trying to compensate for something? Is something wrong such that you need to have 5 additional letters? It's not a good thing. Admissions officers are very, very busy, and they should be able to figure out who you are from the first 3 or the first 2, however many are required. So X or X plus 1 is a very good rule. One of those letters will be from your school counselor. Almost always, if there's 3, then the second one is from a teacher, and then the third one can be a teacher or an outside person. I love outside letters of recommendation, like a coach or a clergy person, or a supervisor to a club that you're a member of, meaning someone who's not at your school necessarily. Because that person probably doesn't have that many letters to write, so they'll be flattered that you asked, and they'll put a lot of time, care, and attention. But the teachers have a lot of letters of recommendation to write, so don't be afraid to have someone outside your school writing one of your letters. My favorite ever was from a student who worked at a local deli, and his deli supervisor, guarantee it's the only letter he's probably ever written, it was the best letter I've saw in 4 years of working at Cornell. Right? So
Right.
you never know.
Right. And for those students, again, if you've been really involved in BBYO for 4 years, probably your advisor or leader for that group,
Leader, yeah.
yeah, they would probably be a great person to write a letter of recommendation on your behalf. I'll just go back to the academic letters really quickly,
Yeah.
that it is important, if there are 2 that are required, to make sure that they're from different academic subjects. So
Yeah.
even MIT, kind of, right, like the mecca of where all engineering students want to go, they even require that 1 be from the STEM field, so science or math, and then 1 be from the social sciences or humanities. So making sure that you have
Have
that balance
balance.
is important.
Yeah, I agree. I think that and I don't want to say this in a negative way, but the letters don't count nearly as much as people think they do, but they can be harmful if they're mediocre or lukewarm. So usually they're good or great, and every now and then they're outstanding and amazing. So I always tell students, don't just ask a teacher, will you write my letter of recommendation? Say, can you write me a great or good? Use an adjective. Can you write me a good letter of recommendation or a strong letter of recommendation? Something along those lines. Gauge their reaction. If they say, oh, yeah, I'm sure I can. I don't know if I know you as well as teacher down the hall, then maybe you shouldn't ask that teacher. So, you just want to be mindful. I always want students to thank their letter writers. I think
Yes.
a box of chocolates or a handwritten card would be nice, genuinely. I think that is a smart thing to do.
Yes.
And then
I
just
always remind the students I'm working with that after they see that their letters have been submitted, that they need
yeah,
to send a thank you
it's a
note
lot
to
of
the
work.
person who wrote it.
I've probably written 100 when I worked at 2 universities. I probably have written 100 letters of recommendation for students moving on to the next level, and it's a lot of work to write a letter and put in a lot of effort. So I certainly want the students and parents to be very thankful to their letter writers. Strategic application tips. So we always want students to find universities or programs that align with their academic interests, but also with their strengths. Um, And then other tips, maybe Rena, if you wanted to take over.
Right. So I kind of want to go to the list at the bottom. So
Yeah,
for
go
me,
for
I
it.
think
Yeah.
that's a really important piece of it is the fit. And so when we're thinking about it, when I'm talking to students, when we think about universities, it's more than just like what the ranking is or the name brand or, where your parents went to school. This is where you're going to live for 4 years. So we want to make sure that the university obviously has the academic program so it meets your academic interests and you can get the degree that you want, but it's also where you're going to live. So we want to make sure it's a place that you're going to grow emotionally, spiritually, socially. You're going to have a strong community. All of those are important components when thinking about the university you want to attend. And then we also want to make sure that students have that balanced list, right? So even if you're aiming for some of those most selective universities like Stanford or MIT, we want to make sure that students are, when I'm working with students, that they're still equally excited about and knowledgeable about, their likely schools and their target schools, making sure that that balanced list exists. And then I work a lot with students on strategy for early decision, early action. How are we going to make that decision about 10 schools? 10 schools
Yeah.
is a great number.
Max. We're very aware that a lot of students these days will apply to many more than 10. They really don't need to if they have the right balance of universities. That middle bullet says, research universities. I want students to visit and parents to visit universities. I always say for ninth and 10th graders, maybe visit unofficially or opportunistically or, almost accidentally. If you happen to be near a university, you don't need to take an official tour. Just set foot on campus so your child can see what the university looks like, architecture, size, setting, location, and so forth. For rising 11th graders and then throughout all of 11th grade and then rising 12th graders, so 2 summers plus 11th grade, I definitely want students and parents to visit universities officially. And you have to sometimes sign up a bit in advance, maybe 3, 4 weeks, maybe 1 or 2 or 3 months in advance, because they can fill
Especially
up
during spring
breaks.
break. It
Yeah,
fills up quickly.
they fill up. Yeah. So you want to sign up, go to the university admissions page, click on visit campus. There will be a calendar, sign up for a date and a time. I would say it's the only fun thing left in the admissions process is visiting universities. So I wish people would do it. It's surprising to me how many don't, but I really, when you're writing your essays and they ask, why do you want to study here at our institution, it's a lot easier to articulate that if you have been to that university, or even what do you want to study here. And you might want to study mechanical engineering, but you might want to study mechanical engineering at university A for a different reason from why you want to study mechanical at universities B or C. And visiting can really help you figure that out. And also, probably the most important thing about visiting, if you don't like a university, that's okay, move on, don't apply there. It's dumbfounding to me that students apply to universities that they have no desire to attend. I was like, there's 2,000 US universities, 160 in Canada, and 100 and something in the UK. Those are our most popular ones with our students. I mean, I'm sure you can find some that match. And then resources, if you could, Rena.
Right. So I think we're all familiar with Hillel. Hillel is really active on the majority of college campuses. And so I think that if Jewish life is important for you, for your child, when they are going to campus, that can look different for different students, right? For some students, it may mean kosher food. It may mean Friday night services. For other students, it may just mean to know that there are other Jewish students on campus. Hillel has all of this information. They have percentages of Jewish students on campus and then the actual number, because sometimes the percentage and the number look different depending on the size of the school. ADL has a new feature, the anti-Semitism report card. This is 2 years old. I think I would admittedly say to take it potentially with a grain of salt, because here's what I will say. Unfortunately, with the climate the way that it is, I think that anti-Semitism exists on most college campuses in some way or form. So avoiding it is probably not going to happen. What is important is to see, what is the university doing about it? What sort of support is there for Jewish students through an organization like Hillel? right? So it's more about like, what is the robust administration response to it? And that's really what the ADL report card is looking at, is more of the institutional response to it. Chabad is very prominent on a lot of college campuses. A lot of students like to take advantage of Chabad because they offer free food and free Shabbat dinner for high school or for college students. So that's, a fun resource. And there's certainly a trend for gap years in Israel, or gap years in general, whether or not in Israel or abroad. I think my advice in general is that even if you're planning to take a gap year, I think it's still really important to apply during your senior year of high school. And then once accepted, check about the deferral. If 100% you want to do the gap year, you may want to be a little more discerning in your school list to make sure that those schools will allow for a deferral to take a year off. But generally, you want to make sure that you have your college placement in order before you take that gap year.
Great. We have 10 minutes for Q&A, but I can go over. I don't know if you can, Rena. It's okay if you
I can go
cannot.
over a little bit.
I was
Yeah.
going to say,
No, I
maybe
can.
so 10 to 15 minutes, I think, is a lot of time to cover questions. We had over 50 questions, so I think we can cover a lot. We have a QR code here. So I think it was on the same QR code as the little QR code on each slide. So we encourage everyone to communicate with our company, set up a free consultation, a free conversation, talk to one of my colleagues, or talk to me, or talk to Rena, to figure out if, Accept You or college counseling could be a good fit for you. And we encourage you to do so. And we thank BBYO for this opportunity. I think, Erica, do you want us to just dive into the questions?
Yeah, I think that would be great.
All right. I mean, Rena, we're on a shared Google Doc.
I know. I'm scrolling. That's how
I'm a
long it is.
little.
I can
Oh, yeah,
I
I'm a
can tell
little.
you that there was one that was very popular in the chat, which was, what if your child is just a regular kid who dabbles in a few clubs with
Oh,
continuity, but hasn't made, this person wrote, cured cancer in their science project. So
that's
what
fine.
are we saying about those teens?
Do you want to start? Or
Well, most teens haven't cured cancer, so I think it's okay. I think that there is also a difference in terms of ambition and where students are aiming for, right? And so if you're planning to go to your state school and you have strong grades and you have a variety of
extracurriculars?
extracurriculars,
Yeah,
that's going to be a great profile. If you're aiming for the most selective institutions, then you probably want to work to see, like, of the things I'm dabbling in, which one do I maybe want to dabble in more?
yeah.
Right. And where can I make more of an impact?
Yeah, I don't want people to feel that they're not special when they apply to universities. I mean, we were even talking about, where do you get lost in time? Where do you lose track of time? I mean, you could look interesting and likable in any way, shape, or form, honestly. How you contribute to to BBYO, or to your siblings, if you're a babysitter for your younger siblings, or maybe you have a job at Starbucks. I mean, actually, anything can be really interesting. I remember Rena and I were talking, I don't know if you remember this, Rena, about one of your students last year got into Cornell, and the student worked at, was it ice cream shop or something? Or
no, he was he worked at a restaurant, but he was kind of like, he was the
a
host and then
busser,
also a busser. So he was kind of like, and he had lots of other wonderful
of course.
extracurriculars, but I think it also speaks to that work experience, right? So he did
It's very
karate.
appealing.
He was academically very talented, and he got in early to Cornell. But part of, I think it was the third or fourth thing listed in terms of hierarchy, in terms of importance. A lot of his time was spent working part-time at a restaurant.
It's very appealing to universities. It shows hard work and dedication, work ethic, maturity, responsibility. So hopefully that was helpful.
I just saw a question about testing. I know the questions are kind of all over. Maybe Erica will help curate for us. But in terms of universities being test optional, I do recognize the challenge with that. I do know, and anecdotally, just from students I've worked with, and it was the first year of test optional. I had a student that I worked with that got into Harvard that didn't take a test. So certainly you can apply to universities that are test optional without test scores and still get in. And the universities are reporting that. They will say how many of their applicants did or did not report test scores. But as test scores remain test optional, even though there is certainly a trend to returning to requiring tests at certain institutions, that it does skew them a little bit higher. And so when a
Oh yeah.
university requires tests, then everyone has to submit. So you get a range of tests. When a university is test optional, the scores do really skew very high. And so that's certainly a trend that Stephen and I have seen in the last now 4 or 5 years that
Yeah.
didn't exist in the past, of being strategic. So maybe for this school, you do report your scores, but for this school, you don't.
Actually, I'll just, I'm looking at the Google Doc that has lots of these questions that had been submitted prior. I'll stick with testing for a little bit just because you were on that track. Someone asked, how long will schools be test optional? We don't know. A lot of the top 25 or top 35, however you call the rankings, have gone back, as Rena indicated, to requiring standardized exams, but Princeton and Columbia are still test optional, so it just depends on the institutional priorities. There were some really great universities that were test optional long before COVID. COVID is what triggered the test optional because people could not get to their testing sites. Syracuse, if I'm not mistaken, NYU, Wake Forest University, George Washington, and maybe one other, large national research university. They were University of Chicago, test optional before 2020. So I think what that means is that the universities feel there's a lot more that a student can contribute than just a 1 or 2 or 3 hour exam. So I do want study. I always tell students I call it submission optional, meaning I feel like the students should study for and take their SAT or ACT, but then it's optional to submit it or not submit it if the university gives you that choice. But then someone else
Right.
asked about SAT versus ACT. No difference, meaning the
Yeah.
universities have no preference, is what I should say. If your son or daughter is better at one versus the other, that's the one to focus on. I like for 10th graders to take a practice ACT. Actually, our company offers a free practice ACT and a free practice SAT. And I like for students to take those exams, or take the PSAT, the preliminary SAT, as a 10th grader if your high school offers it. And in 10th grade, I think it's really great to figure out, am I an SAT person or an ACT person, so that you can study for one or the other in the summer, perhaps the summer after 10th grade. And then in 11th grade, take either the SAT or the ACT. The universities have zero preference. The universities that require standardized exams have zero preference for one versus the other. Maybe, Rena, do you want to pick a few questions that you think are
Yeah,
interesting?
or Erica, is there one, because I wasn't really able to monitor the chat, were there themes while we were talking that you noticed? I'm just going back to.
A question that I found really interesting was, what about student athletes? If they are really
Mhm.
focusing on a sport that they think they might pursue in college, how does that affect the rest of their extracurricular balance?
I can help with that. We have a couple experts at our company who are athletics admissions experts, where they've worked in the or as liaisons, if you will, between the athletics department and the admissions department. Athletics is a very different, pardon the pun, ball game, in that we want students who are very serious about a sport. Should probably be proactive in reaching out to coaches in 10th grade, at the earliest, I think, 11th grade, probably at the latest. And we want students, because you might not be noticed by a coach, but maybe if you put yourself on the coach's radar, maybe that coach will notice you. There are forms on every athletics website. So if you go to a university website, click on the athletics page, and then they might say get recruited or contact coaches or something along those lines. So I'm always encouraging students to be, proactive in this approach, but we also have to be mindful of Division 1 versus Division 2 versus Division 3. And the university admissions officers are very well aware that if you're a recruited athlete, there is an expectation that you have, if you will, many fewer extracurricular activities because of the time, energy, effort, dedication towards your sport. So every extracurricular application sheet allows you, or actually requires you as an applicant, to indicate how many hours per week, how many weeks per year, and how many years for each activity. So if you're in, let's say your sport is soccer and you're in soccer at your school for, I don't know, 12 weeks, you might actually be playing soccer 52 weeks a year because you might be on a travel team or a club team. So that indication of how many weeks per year, how many hours per week, how many years, that is signaling to the admissions committees that, yeah, we're not going to expect a lot of other extracurriculars because the students simply won't have time for that. There's a lot of forgiveness there. I don't know if I missed anything.
Well, I would just say if the driving force is to play D1 sports, then that will influence your school list dramatically. If
That's
your
true.
focus is, I want to go to a great school and I hope to play a sport, that changes the equation. So even D1, D2, D3, it really, that recruitment piece for the sports really drives the admissions process.
And I will say, I mean, this is true. 85% of recruited athletes at Harvard are admitted. And you know, the Harvard admit rate is what, between 3 and 4%. So 85%. You say, oh, well, then I'll become a recruited athlete. The problem though is that very few students are at an athletic level that they're recruitable. Harvard also, or Harvard coaches will also say, yeah, you're what I'm looking for on the field. However, your scores need to hit a certain target or your grades need to hit a certain target. There's forgiveness. You don't have to have that 1500 plus on the SAT, but probably 1400 plus, or 13, I would say 1300 plus. You don't have to have all A's, but you could have a few B's sprinkled in, but mostly B pluses and above. So it's a different profile, but it's still quite strong, even at the most highly selected universities.
I was just going to add, because I worked with a student who's playing football and ended up being recruited to University of Chicago, and they was going through the process at a few schools. And there is even this kind of pre-selection when the coaches want them, even before the application process starts, they submit their scores, and the admissions committee at that university, a pre-read will usually give the coaches some indication of, this isn't going to happen for you at this selected institution, even if they're a great football player. So that is, I would say, you definitely, if you're wanting to be a recruited athlete, you're going to want a lot of guidance.
I was going to say, talk to an expert. Yeah.
Erica, are there other themes? Is there another question that you?
We probably have time for one more. I want to be really mindful of everyone who is on tonight. I know we have hit 8 o'clock. There were a few questions that came up ahead of time about, and I'm probably opening up a can of worms here, but about scholarships. Any avenues or suggestions on finding scholarships?
So,
I always direct people to finaid.org, FINAID.org. But that gives a lot of great free information on scholarships and financial aid, but you perhaps not. I mean, I have other things to say, but that's my starting point. Yeah.
I think that's a really important starting point. And I think it's important to differentiate between what is need-based financial aid and merit-based financial aid, which is what we think about when we think about scholarships. And so there are a lot of universities that say they meet 100% of need, and that comes, and then there are universities that will offer merit-based scholarship. And so it is important, if the finances are a consideration, as it is for most families with the price of universities right now, is to know that in many cases, sometimes also the sticker price is not always the end price. A lot of universities will also have a tuition, like a scholar, what is the word I'm looking for? Like the net price calculator on their website. And so I encourage families to also really be thoughtful about that, and to be thoughtful about having those conversations in advance about what is realistic for your child in terms of prices, and to have that conversation in advance and not at the end of the process, right? In terms of what is affordable and what is going to work for your family. But a lot of institutions do have really generous merit scholarships. And that's where you're probably
you can't apply for them though. Well, that's one thing that I always say. I
Pardon?
know we're trying to I'll try and wrap up, but most of our students who receive scholarships, we have tons of students who receive scholarships, but they don't apply for them. They just have a stellar application, and when you
Correct.
apply, there's not a separate box that says, or a separate application typically that says apply for the scholarship at our university as well. They just get admitted to the university, and everyone's very excited about that. And then the next email comes in and says, and you got an XYZ scholarship. Everyone's even more excited about that, but they didn't apply for that XYZ scholarship. They were just awarded it based on their extracurriculars, their interests, their essays, their profile, their letters of recommendation. So, the most highly selective universities typically don't give out too many merit-based scholarships because they consider all of their students merit worthy or meritorious. But if you apply to a program or a university that's maybe below your average SAT or ACT or GPA, you might be such a superstar at that institution that they might be trying to recruit you to go. So there are some exceptions. Vanderbilt has applications for full ride essays, so you can apply to Vandy and apply simultaneously to their university scholarships. Virginia,
Right.
Chapel Hill.
Emory has
Oh,
that as
Emory, I didn't know
well.
that. Yeah. Erica, we don't want to, and I put up the QR code because I think I saw someone missed it. So we have a couple QR codes even on this screen. We'd love to have folks download these these guides. And certainly I'll just go back to the final one. We hope to hear from folks and they set up a consultation or a conversation with one of my colleagues.
Thank you
Yeah.
both so much,
Thank
Stephen
you.
and Rena. We really
Thank you.
appreciate your knowledge and expertise tonight. We had a very active chat, which means our parents were really engaged and had a lot of questions. So, a quick reminder to everyone who attended tonight, this call has been recorded and will be shared out along with some resources from Accept You, their contact information and everything. So if you're looking to book a consultation with them, we will be sending that information all in the follow-up. So have a wonderful night, everyone, and we look forward to seeing you on the next session.
Thanks, Erica,
Great.
and thanks, BBYO. We
Shana
appreciate it.
Tova to everyone as well.
Not so
Yeah,
bad.
bye.
Thank you. Bye.
Thank you.